My name is Tara McCartney. I'm a joint Irish-UK citizen holding an OCI card and living permanently in India. Around 5 years ago, I founded the NGO United for Hope. Since then, we've become a legal entity in Germany, the US, and of course in India. We pursue a smart village strategy, and we do this across 3 different pillars. So for us, one of the key pillars is social enterprise. What we do is we create small businesses within these communities, and we do it in 2 different ways. Some of the businesses are around basic products and services that these local communities need, things like clean water, things like solar energy, things like menstrual hygiene products. Now they of course don't bring a great deal of revenue, but they bring these much needed products and services into the communities, and they create jobs because local people are now providing these products and services within their own communities. However, we also look to additional revenue generation possibilities which bring in higher profits to cross-subsidize these other types of social enterprises. So one that we One that we are involved in, for example, is social tourism. Other possibilities could be the outsourcing of call centers, or it could be manufacturing and so on. What also, of course, is incredibly important is education. Education simply is the cornerstone of development. And if we can educate a new generation of Indians who can then in turn take their own families out of this rural poverty, then we can really transform a community. The 3rd pillar that we work on is sort of a mixed bag. We call it community services. Here we work with the government to get our communities access to government programs. We do work around preventative health. We do work around cleanliness, waste disposal, and so on. And then our aim is that across these multiple pillars, we actually create communities where people are happy to stay in, and thus preventing the move into the urban areas. The process of leaving my corporate career and doing development work in some of North India's most challenging districts was obviously not something that happened overnight. It was a process. Basically, after around 10 years of working in some major companies, such as Microsoft, I realized that this was not my calling in this lifetime. And I started to become very dissatisfied with the work that I was doing. It didn't feel meaningful for me. But of course, it's hard to walk away from that financial security. It's hard to walk away from all of the perks and advantages that you get in such a financially stable environment. So what I did was slowly start to do some projects in India and maintain both. I took a lower level corporate job for a while and did some small projects in India with the aim that if after a year I was successful in doing these smaller projects, I could have a look at making a permanent switch. And that then turned out to be the case. Our projects came further than we had initially hoped, and at that stage it was just impossible for me to stay in the corporate environment, because India and development work was really calling to me. Initiating the work in a village isn't the problem. Maintaining the work in a village is the problem. Quite honestly, I've never, come across a village or discussions with village leaders where they've said, we don't want development, we don't want you to come in with these programs around education or new job possibilities and so on. Everyone wants development. But of course, when you actually go into the details of rolling out that development, there are many challenges. There are challenges around changing mindset. There are challenges around accessing good local staff, and there are major challenges around getting the panchayat, the senior community members, the government, and so on board, so that we're all working in a very collaborative way with a good pace of progress. So getting started is not the problem, keeping it going is. People are moving in huge numbers from the rural areas to the urban areas, especially, I mean, in the states here in the north of India. Uttar Pradesh, for example, has huge movement of rural youth into Delhi. And Delhi is already struggling with all of the demands on its infrastructure and facilities, and that's just going to get worse, and it's going to be even more accelerated by the fact that we have an upcoming water crisis, and then, you know, on the back of that, probably also a food crisis, and so on. So this is, I think, India's most pressing development challenge of our time. So ensuring that these urban centres are able to cater for the people who live there is really a very important task. But who can blame people who move from the rural centres in search for a better life? Who can blame them? You know, if you don't have a decent job, if you don't have, you know, access to the facilities that you see on the television or that you see on your smartphone, wouldn't every one of us want to move for a better life? It's no different than the refugee system or the refugee situation that we have around the world. People see that other people are leading a better life, at least it seems to be the case to them, and they want to move themselves and maybe their families as well to get part of that. And for me, the main problem in the rural communities is lack of jobs. If you don't have any job prospects, then everything else becomes difficult. How you can educate your child in a decent school if you don't have a regular salary, a salary which you can meet your basic needs and beyond. And job creation is unfortunately a very complex matter, and one that people are not focusing on to the degree that they should do in order to keep people within the rural communities. You know, tourism is growing very quickly in India, and rightly so. India is a fascinating place. Westerners, when they come here, are completely overwhelmed by the richness of its culture and the warmth of its people. Social tourism is a type of tourism where the community gets some kind of benefit of the tourist dollars that flow into these communities, and not just, you know, a couple of, you know, rich hotel owners and so on. We are already implementing, or we already have several social tourism projects in the Kushinagar district of eastern Uttar Pradesh. Kushinagar is the death and burial place of the Buddhist. So we receive a lot of Buddhist pilgrims there, many of them coming from countries like Japan, Korea, Sri Lanka, Burma, and so on. And these people express an interest to see, you know, the authentic village life. But even here, closer to Delhi, it's very difficult for a foreign tourist to experience the authentic village life, because if you go into a village, there are no possibilities to stay there, there's no possibilities to eat there, there may be things like language problems, cultural differences, and so on, which make it actually quite difficult for a tourist to get a feel for how the life is there. And that's such a shame, because these are very warm and welcoming people with rich condition, or with rich traditions, and it's you know, a real buzz for tourists to actually, you know, get access to the villagers and to the village traditions. So what we do is we actually put in place accommodation and catering possibilities which cater to Western or other foreign requirements, but within a village environment, so that they are able to eat and sleep in the way that they wish to as part of their tourist experience, but they feel completely safe in walking around the village area. And also these villagers are also used to having foreigners there and know how to behave and know how to treat them. So in the Kushinagar district, we have an on-site guest house where we host paying guests. guests in our rooms there within our community centre, they also are able then to observe an NGO in action. And this actually is the part that they love the most. You know, they love to be able to see the classes, they love to be able to see the social enterprises that we have created. They love to be able to ask questions about these types of activities. But of course, you know, we offer village trips. You know, they love to sit in an oxen cart, you know, to see how chai is made, to drink chai with the local women, to see how a local potterer works, and so on. And there are numerous possibilities for local people to earn a little bit of extra money, whether that's by doing henna or by selling some souvenirs, and so on. So this is the type of social tourism that we're already doing, and I think is possible throughout India if there is some kind of area nearby where tourists are already making their way to. I think this is quite important, because it will be difficult to bring them to a remote area just for that particular experience by itself. Actually, working with sanitation was one of the first projects that we undertook in India. This is going back to 2004, before the major campaigns around sanitation were in place. And it was actually quite a difficult call at that time to get people to sign up to having a toilet. Thankfully, that's changed quite dramatically in the last 5 years, thanks to government campaigns and other campaigns. People are aware of the importance of a toilet, and they do, for the most part, wish for one for themselves. Our communities are now open defecation free, and thankfully we also see a high usage of these toilets, especially among the women and the children. The problem I see, however, is in terms of sustainability. New houses get built, or you know, a daughter or a son gets married and enters into a new family by themselves, and they're not willing to build a toilet in that new house because they're waiting for the government to build it for them. And this simply is not sustainable. You cannot endlessly build toilets for the Indian population as people get married and start their own families, or as a new house gets built, and so on. So I really am concerned about what will happen around open defecation and the sanitation progress as the funds for these programs dry up. My wish would be that in a second phase, the government brings in policies whereby planning permission for a house will not be given unless a toilet is actually built within that house. And of course, there can be ongoing subsidies that can be offered to the poorer aspects of the society, but they have to find a way where the people are both motivated and forced in a way to start taking care of their own sanitation needs. But right now, I don't see that there is a plan in place. Maybe there is, but I don't see it from this, you know, heavily invested program of, you know, a toilet for everyone, right through to, you know, people actually being willing to fund and build their own toilets in the future. You know, when we go and speak to the headmaster or headmistress, mostly it's headmasters, of course in that first moment, you know, they're a little bit embarrassed, or they're unsure actually of what it is that we want to teach. But because they see it as sort of women's affairs, you know, they say, go ahead and do it, and you know, they hand us over to the female teachers and so on. So in terms of, you know, actually getting the work done in schools, or the people not being aware of the importance of preventative health for women, we don't have so much of a challenge. But of course, when we're actually doing those workshops and we're talking to the girls and young women, all of their personal stories come out. Their stories come out about how they're using inadequate. So we don't have issues so much with the head teachers in holding the workshops, but We do, of course, see the enormous levels of stigma that are present in society when we actually, sit down and talk with the girls and the young women, and they tell us their personal stories, stories around how they cannot access hygienic methods to manage their periods, stories around how they're not allowed to visit the temple or to cook during their period, and their deep embarrassment about not just talking about menstruation, but talking about any aspect of their body. Many of these girls and women are not even, naked when they shower. They shower under their clothing because they're so shamed into any sort of acceptance or discussion about their own bodies that they hardly even can bear to look at their bodies themselves. And then, of course, because they don't have access to any funds within the family, and the men don't place a great emphasis on getting access to sanitary pads, for example, for these young women and girls. Very often they're managing their periods in unhygienic ways, and not just unhygienic, but actually dangerous as well, which leads to sickness and disease. So, of course there is an enormous stigma. I would say that when we hold these workshops, there is incredible relief afterwards, because the girls and the women have been holding this in for so long, and when they start to talk, they actually see and have a sense of solidarity with one another. And even friends have not been talking about periods with each other. But when you actually get that friendship and that solidarity from your own friends and from your peer groups, then you start to get a type of courage. And we have many cases where our girls and young women, they then go back into the family home and they ask their mothers, but why can't I go to the temple? Why am I impure? And they start asking these questions also to the male members of their family. And our hope is that through this, the society will slowly open up. So thanks a lot to the people at the Delhi Post for giving me your time today. I really enjoyed meeting you and our exchange of ideas.